Welcome back to the channel. Today we step into the cold, sterile silence of the Ministry of Love. Winston finds himself alone, starving, and watched from every angle. But the real terror isn't the cell, it's what might come next. Why are some prisoners broken so easily, while others hold on to scraps of memory and hope? As we begin this chapter, let's explore the boundary between physical suffering and psychological survival. Stay with us. In the sterile, oppressively lit cell of the Ministry of Love, Winston Smith finds himself swallowed by a silence broken only by the low hum of machinery and the cold surveillance of 4 telescreens, one on each wall. Though he presumes his location, certainty is as unreachable as the outside world, now forgotten. The cell's walls gleam with white porcelain. The bench barely supports his weary body, and the air is saturated with an artificial chill. He has no concept of time, no clocks, no windows, no way to distinguish day from night. The only certainty is pain, the dull ache in his belly, the hunger that claws at his insides, and the mental fog thickening with each hour of solitude. Winston has learned not to move. Sudden gestures are punished instantly by voices from the telescreens. Yet the craving for food, the possibility of breadcrumbs hidden in his pocket, overcomes his restraint. The punishment is immediate, a harsh command from the telescreen shouting his identification. He obeys, trembling. This is not the first cell he has known. Before this, he was held in a common lockup filled with a spectrum of criminals. Drunkards, thieves, prostitutes, and a few like himself, party prisoners. What struck Winston during that experience was the stark contrast in behavior. The ordinary criminals were loud, defiant, even vulgar. They mocked the guards, shared smuggled food, and shouted obscenities at the telescreens. Meanwhile, party prisoners remained silent and petrified, paralyzed by invisible terror. The ordinary criminals seemed to operate within a different moral universe, one where rules could be manipulated through bribery, cleverness, or shamelessness. The forced labor camps they all expected to be sent to didn't seem horrifying to them, only another arena in which survival depended on connections and cunning. Trust and responsibility were reserved not for the faithful party members, but for murderers and gangsters. The hierarchy of sin had been flipped. Those who had broken human law thrived, while political dissenters were crushed. The cell remains in a state of motionless tension. Winston witnesses the arrival of various prisoners, a belligerent old woman thrown bodily into the cell by guards, a woman who vomits on the floor before resting her head on his shoulder, even calling herself Smith, and musing sentimentally that she might be his mother. This grotesque intimacy underscores the psychic dislocation that pervades the prison. No identity is stable, no relationship trustworthy. Other prisoners enter and leave the cell in a quiet stream. Among the party prisoners, no one dares to speak, let alone look each other in the eyes. The term Room 101 circulates in hushed tones, unexplained but weighted with dread. It is a name that changes the color of faces and drains courage from the bones. Meanwhile, Winston attempts to measure time by counting porcelain bricks, but his mind cannot hold steady. Sometimes his fear of torture overpowers his hunger. At other times, he imagines death in vivid detail. Blows to the face, boots to the shins, begging for mercy with shattered teeth. Even Julia fades from his thoughts, replaced by O'Brien and the imagined arrival of a razor blade smuggled to him as an instrument of escape. But Winston isn't even sure he would use it. Pain, anticipated or real, turns his resolve into mist. Life, even 10 minutes more, becomes a twisted form of hope. Then comes a jolt of change. Ampleforth, the disheveled poet, is thrown into the cell, shoeless and unshaven with an air of distracted innocence. He paces aimlessly before noticing Winston. When questioned, he confesses his crime, leaving the word Abba in a Kipling poem. He had tried to change it, but couldn't find another rhyme for Rod. The absurdity of his arrest, however, is overshadowed by the swift announcement of his fate. Without ceremony, a guard calls out his name. Room 101. Ampleforth, confused but compliant, is led away. The door slams again, and another familiar figure appears. Parsons. Winston is shocked. Here stands a model party man, broken and trembling, accused of thought crime not by his enemies, but by his own daughter. Parsons describes his downfall with a mix of fear and misplaced pride. He had muttered "down with Big Brother" in his sleep, and his 7-year-old daughter, listening at the keyhole, reported him. Rather than rage or sorrow, he expresses admiration for her loyalty to the regime. He insists on his innocence in action, even while declaring his guilt in thought. The telescreen orders Winston to uncover his face. Parsons, too, is eventually taken away. The cell fills with new prisoners, including one whose emaciated skull-like appearance shocks even the desensitized Winston. It becomes clear that the man is starving. Another prisoner, a chinless, rat-faced man with pouchy cheeks, offers him a piece of bread. The telescreen erupts in fury. The bread falls to the floor. The donor is ordered to stand and face the door. A massive guard enters and delivers a blow so savage that the man is thrown across the room. Blood spills from his mouth, his dental plate falls out, and he returns to his bench, disfigured and humiliated, still seeking the gaze of his fellow inmates in a futile quest for dignity. Then the unthinkable. The skull-faced man is called for room 101. He falls to his knees, begging, screaming, offering to confess anything, betray anyone, even his own children. He points at the chinless man, trying to replace himself. But resistance is futile. Guards drag him out, one hand crushed in the struggle. His screams dissolve into silence. He is gone. Alone once more, Winston's mind circles endlessly around the same thoughts. Pain, food, O'Brien, Julia, the razor blade. His body aches from the bench. Hunger is replaced by thirst. The humming lights induce a dazed state. He walks to relieve the pain, only to sit back down in dizziness. Every slight relief brings the fear back sharper. In that fear, the possibility of rescue or betrayal becomes one and the same. And then, O'Brien appears. The moment Winston has imagined arrives, and it shatters all illusions. O'Brien is not here to save him. He is part of the system. He steps aside, revealing a broad-shouldered guard holding a black truncheon. O'Brien speaks gently, almost sadly. "You knew this, Winston," he says. And Winston realizes that he had always known. There had never been a rescue, only the inevitable. The blow comes silent, precise, and shattering. It lands on Winston's elbow, and the pain is so excruciating that light explodes behind his eyes. He collapses, clutching his arm. There is no courage in the face of pain. There are no heroes. Only the endless truth of agony and the desperate hope that it will stop. In a cell without time, light, or any trace of humanity, Winston Smith exists in a suspended state of fear and hunger. The walls around him gleam with white porcelain. The ceiling looms high, and the 4 ever-watching telescreens exude a cold, humming authority. He doesn't know the hour of the day or even the day itself. He only knows pain, a constant ache in his stomach, and the growing hunger that claws at his mind. He has not eaten since his arrest, which could have been a day or more ago. As he sits on the narrow bench, he thinks longingly of breadcrumbs that might still be hidden in his overalls. In a moment of weakness, he searches his pocket, only to be scolded by the telescreen. Obedience is expected, and discipline is absolute. Before this isolation, Winston had been in a holding cell packed with ordinary criminals, people charged with theft, drunkenness, prostitution. Compared to the party members, these individuals were brash and shameless. They hurled curses at guards, traded food, laughed in the face of the telescreen's commands. Some even flirted with the authorities, nicknaming the guards and seeking favors. The political prisoners, however, remained silent, paralyzed by the weight of their imagined guilt. Their fear was more profound, less performative. The difference was as startling as it was tragic. Those who broke the party's laws were lifeless. Those who broke the state's laws were alive. Amid the flow of prisoners, Winston witnesses disturbing characters. A drunken old woman is thrown onto his lap, vomits, and mutters with warmth that her name is also Smith. Perhaps, she says, she is his mother. A grotesque and tragic irony. No one else dares speak. The name Room 101 drifts like a whisper, dreaded and undefined. When Ampleforth, a poet, enters the cell, Winston musters the courage to speak. Ampleforth was arrested for leaving the word "gone" at the end of a line in a Kipling poem. The rhyme was unavoidable, he explains almost proudly. The absurdity of this offense would be laughable if not for its consequences. Ampleforth, confused but compliant, is soon taken away. Room 101, the guard calls. Next comes Parsons, the very symbol of party obedience. To Winston's shock, he's been arrested for thought crime. His daughter, a model child of the regime, heard him say "down with Big Brother" in his sleep and turned him in. Yet he bears no grudge. He's proud of her loyalty. He insists he must be guilty. After all, would the party arrest someone innocent? Winston observes the breakdown of dignity, the pain, the dehumanization, the slow unraveling of the self. When a skull-faced man, skeletal and hollow, is brought into the cell, everyone senses he is dying of starvation. A chinless, timid man finally offers him bread, but mercy has no place here. The telescreen shouts. The guards arrive. The chinless man is punched so violently that his body crashes across the room, his mouth pouring blood and fragments of teeth. No one speaks. Moments later, the skull-faced man hears his name called. Room 101. His reaction is immediate, terror beyond comprehension. He begs, he pleads, he offers to betray anyone. He even says, "Take my wife and children, but not Room 101. He claws at the floor, clings to the bench, cries like an animal. In the end, broken and silent, he is taken away. Winston remains, alone again. The bread dropped earlier is still on the floor. Hunger gives way to thirst. Numbness creeps in. Only the fear remains alive. Thoughts drift. O'Brien, Julia, the razor blade that may or may not come. He wonders, if I could save Julia by doubling my pain, would I? His answer is intellectual, not felt. In this place, feeling doesn't exist. Only pain. And then O'Brien enters. For a moment, Winston believes in hope. "They've got you too," he exclaims. But O'Brien only smiles gently. "They got me a long time ago." It's a betrayal Winston had always known deep down, and now it comes true. A guard steps in with a truncheon. The pain is blinding. It lands on Winston's elbow, sending his body into convulsions. There is no resisting pain. No one is brave in its face. He lies on the floor, writhing, repeating to himself, "In the face of pain, there are no heroes." One of the most sobering realizations in this chapter is how physical pain eclipses ideology, loyalty, or love. In Winston's reflection, nothing in the world was so bad as physical pain. In the face of pain, there are no heroes. The narrative crystallizes Orwell's chilling thesis. Totalitarianism triumphs not by persuasion, but by the sheer force of suffering. Pain breaks resolve faster than doctrine ever could. The lesson here is profound. No system that relies on the infliction of pain can claim moral authority. Pain is not a purifier. It is a weapon of control. When the woman, drunken and degraded, briefly claims to be Winston's mother, we are reminded of the ghost of affection that lingers in even the most dehumanized souls. Her words, though slurred and absurd, hint at a longing for connection. Yet in this world, all such bonds are eroded. Children denounce parents, friends fear each other, and Winston, who once risked everything for Julia, can no longer feel her presence in his heart. A society that severs trust does more than police behavior. It kills love itself. Parsons' insistence on his guilt, even in the absurdity of being turned in by his daughter, exposes the terrifying effectiveness of psychological manipulation. "Of course I'm guilty," he says. He believes that innocence is irrelevant because the party is infallible. The horror is not in being punished for a crime, but in accepting punishment for simply existing with a mind. When fear rewrites reality, truth becomes what authority dictates, not what actually occurred. Though we do not yet see what lies inside Room 101, its power is already legendary. Its mention causes people to break down, weep, and offer their families for slaughter. The horror of Room 101 is that it is the final stripping of humanity. Whatever awaits there is tailored to the prisoner's deepest fear, and in confronting it, they lose the last shred of themselves. Every totalitarian system has its own Room 101, not always literal, but always existential, a fear used to erase resistance and remake the soul. The image of the chinless man offering bread is one of the last gestures of human compassion in this grim chapter. His reward? A brutal beating. The system punishes kindness because kindness is subversive. It implies equality. In a world where the state is God, empathy is blasphemy, yet the gesture matters. In the end, history is written not only by the victors, but by the vanquished who still reached out to help. Orwell doesn't just describe violence, he slows it down. The punch to the chinless man is not just an act, it is a message. It is theater, meant to instill terror not just in the victim, but in all who watch. The telescreen roars, the guards march, and the cell becomes a stage for domination. Dictatorships thrive not only by punishing dissent, but by making that punishment public. The man chosen for Room 101 tries to sacrifice another in his place. He points fingers. He lies. He cries. There is no unity here, only desperation. In this system, solidarity is impossible because fear is omnipresent. Betrayal becomes the only currency of survival. Without trust, no resistance can endure. Fear atomizes the soul and scatters the spirit. Perhaps the most tragic detail is Winston's inability to feel. He knows he loves Julia, but cannot summon the emotion. He wonders if he'd trade more pain to save her. Answers yes, but only intellectually. It's not real. This place has begun to hollow him out. Feeling is the first thing to die. Repression is not only about obedience, it's about erasing the self. O'Brien's entrance is the final betrayal. Winston had pinned hope on him, envisioned him as a kindred spirit. Instead, he is the architect of Winston's torment. This duality of O'Brien as both torturer and friend underscores the cruelty of psychological domination. "They got me a long time ago," O'Brien says. And in that moment, Winston sees the full machinery of control. The system doesn't just punish the body, it seduces the soul. In sum, this chapter is not merely about a prison cell. It is a meditation on power, on what it means to control not just behavior, but memory, desire, fear, and identity. Winston's journey from doubt to pain mirrors the process by which authoritarianism claims the human spirit. In this world, truth is not what you see, it is what you are told. And if you resist, Room 101 awaits. In the dim confines of the Ministry of Love, Winston Smith, trapped in the slow torture of time and silence, found himself awakening slightly from his numb state of mind. His senses, dulled by fear and starvation, sparked with a sliver of curiosity and urgency as he spotted a familiar figure entering the same cell, Ampleforth, the poet. Driven by a mixture of desperation and faint hope, Winston dared to speak, risking the omnipresent surveillance of the telescreen, suspecting, if only faintly, that Ampleforth might be the one to deliver the long-awaited razor blade. Yet no reprimand came from the screen, allowing a brief conversation to unfold between the two prisoners. Ampleforth, although startled by Winston's voice, seemed mildly relieved to find a known face. His own transgression, he revealed, was as trivial as it was absurd. a poetic decision that led to his downfall. While editing a collection of Kipling's poems, he had left the word wah at the end of a line because no suitable rhyme could replace it. The party's rigid censorship and ideological purging had claimed another victim over a rhyme scheme. In his discomfort and confusion, Ampleforth offered a surprisingly earnest observation about the lack of rhymes in English shaping the course of its poetic tradition. But for Winston, who was weighed down by fear and bodily agony, such musings were far removed from the present reality. Their exchange was short-lived. The cold machinery of the regime reasserted itself when the telescreen barked for silence. The two men fell into a nervous stillness, each left to spiral into his private torment. Ampleforth shifted uncomfortably on the narrow bench while Winston sat motionless, bracing for the unknown. Time passed, indistinct and oppressive, measured only by the internal contractions of fear that plagued Winston's body. Then came the sound of boots. Cold sweat broke out. The door swung open and the guard summoned Ampleforth. Room 101. The poet left with a confused look on his face as though still grappling with the illogic of his crime. Left alone once more, Winston's mind circled the same set of thoughts like a broken record. The pain in his belly, the absence of food, the looming terror of room 101, the blood, the screams, O'Brien, Julia, and the elusive razor blade. It was not long before the boots returned, this time bringing in another familiar face. Parsons, the loud, loyal party man from his own apartment block. Winston was genuinely shocked. Of all people, Parsons had seemed the epitome of orthodox devotion. But Parsons, clearly distraught, had lost his composure. He paced erratically, his trembling knees betraying his inner turmoil. With a broken voice, he confessed, "Thought crime." The irony was palpable, and Parsons himself could hardly believe it. Still, he accepted the charge with a sort of baffled righteousness, clinging to his faith in the party's justice. He pleaded with Winston, almost childishly, asking whether 5 or 10 years in a labor camp might be his fate. He assured Winston and the telescreen, no doubt listening, that he trusted the party and that his loyalty had been unquestionable. The crime had not been in action, but in dreams. In his sleep, he had uttered the damning phrase, "Down with Big Brother," a seemingly unconscious betrayal that had sealed his doom. In a tragic twist, Parsons revealed that his own daughter had reported him. The child, only 7, had heard him muttering and informed the thought police. And yet, rather than anger, he expressed pride. To him, this act of betrayal was proof of a correct upbringing, a warped manifestation of ideological success. In praising his daughter's loyalty to the party, Parsons embodied the complete internalization of the regime's values, that love for the state must transcend all personal bonds, even those of parent and child. As if to compound the humiliation, Parsons suddenly gave in to a physical need, apologizing to Winston before defecating in the cell's defective lavatory. The act was loud and uncontainable, and the stench lingered, sour and oppressive, long afterward. The telescreen immediately intervened, commanding Winston to uncover his face when he shielded it in instinctive disgust. The dehumanizing environment tolerated no expressions of emotion or modesty. Even privacy in suffering was forbidden. This chapter serves as a profound indictment of a system that punishes the most benign intellectual deviations and turns children into informants against their own parents. Both Ampleforth and Parsons symbolize different facets of the regime's cruelty. Ampleforth, the absurdity of controlling thought down to the structure of poetry. Parsons, the grotesque loyalty that leads a man to thank his persecutors for saving him from himself. The room they inhabit, nameless and timeless, becomes a place where the very soul is stripped of resistance, where ideological purity is achieved not through understanding, but through fear and brokenness. And Winston, watching this procession of human degradation, can do nothing but wait. The razor blade does not come. O'Brien does not come. Julia is just a shadow in his memory. All he has are his thoughts, his pain, and the slow unraveling of what remains of his identity. In the sterile silence of the ministry of love, every word, every movement, and every thought is measured. And as each person is taken away, one to room 101, another by confession, another by betrayal, the walls close in further. The telescreen watches. The party waits. And Winston, like all who came before him, can only wait for the final unthinkable fate. In the gray stillness of the ministry of love, Winston sat wrapped in a numb lethargy until something stirred within him. A faint impulse, born not of hope but of necessity, nudged him to speak. He called out softly, "Ampleforth," risking punishment from the ever-watchful telescreen. To his quiet surprise, no voice barked back. Instead, a familiar figure, startled but not hostile, turned toward him. Ampleforth, the poet, blinked through the dimness and murmured, "Ah, Smith, you too." Their conversation unfolded with a sense of awkwardness, not only because of the setting, but because neither man fully grasped what had brought them there. "There is only one offense, is there not?" Ampleforth said, sitting stiffly. And then he explained his crime. He had left the word God at the end of a poetic line, simply because it rhymed with rod, and there were no better alternatives. "Do you realize that there are only 12 rhymes to rod in the entire language?" he asked, half defending, half lamenting. It was a moment of absurd beauty, a flash of intellectual warmth in a place designed to extinguish such light. Ampleforth's face briefly glowed, not with defiance, but with the pure joy of having discovered a curious fact about poetry. He even pondered aloud whether the structure of English poetry had been shaped by the language's scarcity of rhymes. It was an idea too subtle, too gentle to survive in the sterile air of the cell. Winston, trapped in pain and fear, found it neither interesting nor comforting. Yet even in this small exchange, Orwell offers something powerful. The idea that even in the face of annihilation, the mind seeks patterns, ideas, meaning. The act of speaking, of wondering about rhyme, becomes a fragile form of resistance, and through it we glimpse the enduring dignity of thought. When Winston asked Ampleforth what time it was, the poet hesitated. "There is no difference between night and day in this place. I do not see how one can calculate the time," he said. The absence of time here was not merely inconvenient, it was symbolic. In Orwell's world, time is stripped away as part of a greater project, the dismantling of identity. Without time, there is no sequence. Without sequence, there is no memory. And without memory, there is no self. This is one of the party's greatest triumphs, not just to rewrite history, but to steal time from the present. Their brief dialogue was silenced when the telescreen ordered quiet. The cell returned to its usual tension, measured not by clocks, but by the gut-deep fear of footsteps. And then they came. The door opened. A guard appeared. With 2 words, he sealed Ampleforth's fate. Room 101. That phrase carried no context, no details, just dread. Ampleforth left the cell, not protesting, not crying, just vaguely puzzled, like a man walking into fog. Room 101. A name, a number, a void that could hold anything. For each person, the worst thing in the world. Time passed again, or maybe it didn't. For Winston, the hours now bled together like watercolors in the rain. His mind chased itself in loops. The pain in his belly, a piece of bread, blood and screams. O'Brien, Julia, the razor blade. Then came the next visitor. The air shifted, bringing with it the odor of cold sweat, and in walked Parsons. Parsons, the loud, loyal neighbor, the unquestioning servant of the party, now appeared shrunken. He was trembling, pacing, barely able to speak. Winston stared in disbelief. "You here," he said. But Parsons was past conversation. When asked what crime he had committed, his reply was both heartbreaking and absurd. thought crime. The word escaped him with disbelief, as though it could not possibly apply. And yet, he confessed fully. He hadn't done anything, hadn't taken any actions, but he had said in his sleep the words, "Down with Big Prawn." That was enough. That was everything. This moment is central to Orwell's vision, a world where even the unconscious mind is not safe. The party's surveillance extends not only into actions or words, but into the depths of the dreaming brain. The boundaries between guilt and innocence collapse. In Orwell's world, intent doesn't matter. Results don't matter. Only loyalty, absolute and unthinking. Yet what makes Parsons' story even more chilling is his response. He doesn't express anger or fear. He speaks instead of trust. "They'll give me a fair hearing," he says. "I'll thank them for saving me before it was too late." These words are spoken not with irony, but with sincerity. And in them, Orwell reveals the most terrifying outcome of totalitarianism, the victim who worships his jailer. Parsons' devotion remains intact even as he is destroyed by it. Then comes the last twist of the knife. "Who denounced you?" Winston asks. Parsons answers with strange pride. "My little daughter. Pretty smart for a nipper of 7, eh?" He beams, not with shame, but with the satisfaction of a man whose child has done her patriotic duty. This more than anything signals how deeply the party has burrowed into human life. The family is no longer sacred. Children no longer trust parents, they monitor them. Love is not a shield, but a trap. In a world like this, loyalty is measured not in kindness, but in surveillance. And parents are proud when their children betray them. The tragedy is complete. As if to reinforce how fully humanity has been stripped away, the chapter ends in physical humiliation. Parsons, unable to hold his bowels, asks Winston for permission, then relieves himself loudly in the cell's defective lavatory. The telescreen immediately orders Winston, "Uncover your face. Even shame must be visible. Even disgust must be monitored." The stench that fills the cell afterward becomes a final, lingering metaphor, proof of the regime's power to make even the body a site of control and degradation. And yet, through all this, Orwell leaves us not only with horror, but with reflection. He is asking us to look beyond the cruelty and ask, how did they get here? How did a world come to criminalize language, to erase time, and to celebrate betrayal, and to convert gratitude into submission? The answer is gradual. The loss of truth, the erosion of thought, the policing of speech. None of these happen overnight. But once begun, they spread quietly. Until people like Parsons, good, decent, foolish, find themselves locked away for dreaming the wrong dream. From this haunting chapter, we are left with lessons that matter more today than ever. The smallest freedoms of language, thought, memory are worth defending because once they are gone, they do not return easily. Loyalty to systems must never outweigh loyalty to truth and humanity. We must teach our children to love, to question, and to protect, not to report, to fear, or to obey blindly. And most of all, we must never thank those who rob us of our dignity, even if they claim to do so for our own good. In Orwell's prison, there are no heroes, only broken men. But in reading their stories, we are reminded of what we still have and what we must never surrender. Following Parsons' removal from the cell, Winston witnessed a steady and silent procession of other prisoners, men and women, each entering and leaving as if swept in by an unseen current. Among them was a woman who was condemned to room 101, a sentence that visibly altered her appearance. As the dreaded words were spoken, she seemed to collapse into herself, her face shifting color, her body shrinking with dread. To be sent to room 101 was not simply to face punishment, it was to confront the deepest, most personal form of terror. Time had ceased to flow meaningfully for Winston. Whether it was morning, afternoon, or midnight, the only markers were the tremors of fear and the shuffling of feet. At one point, the cell held 6 prisoners, their bodies stiff, their expressions unreadable. Among them was a chinless man whose rodent-like features, pouched cheeks, darting pale eyes, gave him a peculiar harmlessness. Yet his eyes, flickering from one face to another, betrayed an inner anxiety that words could not express. Then came another prisoner whose appearance was so jarring that Winston physically reacted to it. The man's face was skeletal, thin to the point of grotesqueness, his mouth and eyes stretched unnaturally large. His gaunt features glowed with something more than illness. There was a burning, haunted look, a silent scream of hatred and despair that lived in his eyes. The man was dying of starvation. The recognition of this fact spread silently through the cell. Even the rodent-faced man noticed, his gaze returning again and again to the starving figure. At last, overcome by a flicker of human decency, he rose and clumsily offered the dying man a grimy piece of bread. But compassion had no place in the ministry of love. A deafening roar from the telescreens shattered the moment. "Bumstead 2713, Bumstead J, let that piece of bread!" The bread fell to the floor. The rodent-faced man was ordered to stand, to face the door, and to remain still. He obeyed, trembling. Then the door opened, and with terrifying calm, a guard entered and delivered a brutal blow to the man's mouth. His body was hurled across the cell, blood streaming from his mouth and nose. He lay stunned, then crawled back to his bench, his face disfigured, his mouth a swollen, bleeding ruin. The prisoners remained silent, hands on knees, their faces empty. Even in shared trauma, there was no unity, no comfort. Each person suffered alone. Soon, the door opened again. This time, it was the skeletal man who was summoned. "Room 101, said the officer. At those words, something inside him shattered. He collapsed to his knees, pleading with the officer like a child. He offered to confess to anything, real or imagined, so long as he was spared room 101. "You've been starving me for weeks. Finish it off and let me die. Shoot me. Hang me. Just not room 101. His voice rose to a frenzy, offering up names, even his own wife and children. "You can take the whole lot of them and cut their throats in front of my eyes, and I'll stand by and watch it, but not room 101. He desperately looked around, hoping to divert the sentence onto another. His eyes landed on the rodent-faced man, who still bore the fresh wounds of kindness. "That's the one you ought to be taking, not me," he shouted. He accused the man of saying traitorous things, begging the officer to switch their places. But it was no use. The guards grabbed him. He screamed, clung to the bench, wailed like an animal, until a guard broke his fingers with a single brutal kick. At last, the man was dragged out, limp and defeated, his spirit broken entirely. Then silence returned. Time passed again. Winston could no longer tell how much. He was alone now. The pain of sitting had become unbearable, but walking brought dizziness. The bread still lay on the floor, but hunger had been replaced by thirst. His mouth was dry and sour. The constant hum of the lights, the unchanging brightness of the cell, had begun to dissolve his sense of reality. Sometimes he thought of Julia, wondering if she was suffering worse. He thought, well, if I could save Julia by doubling my own pain, would I do it? And answered himself, yes, but only as an idea. In this place, feeling no longer reached the heart. One could know what should be done, but not feel it, because here only pain remained. Pain and the anticipation of more. Then the sound of boots approached again. The door opened. O'Brien entered. For a brief moment, Winston's body reacted without fear, driven by shock. "They've got you too," he exclaimed, forgetting the telescreen, forgetting caution. But O'Brien's answer was quiet, almost amused. "They got me a long time ago." Then came the truth. O'Brien stepped aside. A guard followed, wielding a long black truncheon. Winston looked at it and knew. O'Brien spoke once more. "You know this, Winston. Don't deceive yourself. You did know it. You have always known it." And indeed, Winston had always known. O'Brien had never been a savior, only a shadow of the party, always part of the machine. Before thought could catch up, the blow landed. It struck Winston's elbow with a pain so intense that the world exploded into yellow light. He crumpled, cradling his arm, paralyzed by agony. There was laughter from the guard, and in that moment, a terrible truth became undeniable. In the face of pain, there are no heroes. That line ran over and over in Winston's mind as he writhed on the floor. The illusion of resistance, the concept of sacrifice, even love itself, all vanished beneath the overwhelming command of physical torment. The body, once broken, surrendered everything. There was nothing in the world worse than pain. Not fear, not loneliness, not death. Pain reigned alone, supreme. And now Winston knew. There would be no redemption in this place. Only obedience, born of suffering. After Parsons was removed from the cell, silence once again returned to the room. New prisoners came and went without explanation, like figures drifting through a fog of fear. Among them, Winston observed a woman who, upon hearing the words Room 101, appeared to collapse into herself, her face twisting in silent horror. She seemed to shrivel and change color as if the mere mention of that room had transformed her physically. It was a powerful sign that Room 101 was not just a place, it was a boundary, a symbol of ultimate fear. Time passed unmarked. Winston had no way of knowing whether it was morning or night. The light never changed, and the humming continued without interruption. Around him, 6 prisoners, men and women, sat in frozen stillness. Across from Winston was a man whose chinless, pouchy face gave him the appearance of a harmless rodent. His pale eyes flitted nervously from one person to the next, but darted away immediately if met with eye contact. He looked like someone trying to disappear without moving. Then the door opened again, and another prisoner was brought in. Winston felt a chill run through him. The new man was ordinary looking, possibly a technician of some sort, but his face was ghastly, sunken and skull-like, the eyes too large, too intense. It was not just illness, it was starvation. The realization struck Winston, and it seemed the others in the room. Something unspoken passed between them. The rodent-faced man's eyes kept returning to the starved figure, then guiltily turning away. Finally, after much hesitation, he stood, waddled across the cell, and with a nervous gesture, offered the man a grimy piece of bread. At once, the telescreen exploded. A roar filled the room. "Bumstead, 2713 Bumstead, G. Let that piece of bread." The rodent-faced man dropped it. Then came the second command. "Remain standing where you are. Face the door. Make no movement." What followed was brutal. The door opened again, and a stumpy guard with immense arms entered. At a silent signal, he stepped forward and struck the man with the full force of his body. The blow landed squarely on the face. Winston saw the man's body lifted off the floor and thrown across the cell, landing in a heap beside the lavatory. Blood poured from his mouth and nose. He whimpered softly, half-conscious. When he moved again, 2 halves of a dental plate fell from his mouth, clinking on the floor. No one moved. No one spoke. The other prisoners sat still, hands crossed on their knees, eyes forward. The man crawled back to his seat. His face had darkened on one side, his lips swollen and shapeless. From time to time, a small drop of blood fell onto his overalls. His darting gray eyes now looked more ashamed than ever. He wasn't just in pain, he was trying to see if the others despised him for it. That was the cost of a simple act of kindness. Moments later, the door opened again. The officer pointed to the skull-faced man. "Room 101, he said. The effect was immediate. The man collapsed to his knees, clasping his hands like a child in prayer. "Comrade, officer," he cried, "you don't have to take me to that place. Haven't I told you everything already? What else is it you want to know? There's nothing I wouldn't confess, nothing. Just tell me what it is and I'll confess straight off. Write it down and I'll sign it, anything. Not room 101. His voice was desperate, rising into a shriek. He offered anything, his life, a confession, even the betrayal of others. Do anything to me, shoot me, hang me, Sentence me to 25 years. I've got a wife and 3 children. The biggest of them isn't 6 years old. You can take the whole lot of them and cut their throats in front of my eyes, but not room 1. The officer only said, "Room 101. In his panic, the man turned on the rodent-faced prisoner. "That's the one you ought to be taking, not me," he shouted. He tried to pin the blame on someone else, claimed that the telescreen had malfunctioned and missed a moment of disloyalty from the other man. The guards moved forward. The prisoner's voice turned into a scream. "Take him, not me!" In one last act of resistance, or maybe sheer animal panic, he threw himself onto the floor, clutching at the iron leg of the bench. He howled wordlessly. The guards struggled to pull him free, but he held on with shocking strength. Then one of them kicked his hand, breaking his fingers. The scream that followed was different. It was final. They lifted him to his feet, broken and quiet, and led him away. "Room 101, the officer repeated for the last time. Then he was gone. Time passed again, slow and disorienting. Winston remained alone. His body ached from the hard bench. He moved only to ease the pain, walking in circles, dizzy and weak. The piece of bread still lay on the floor. At first, he had to fight not to look at it, but later hunger faded into thirst. His mouth was sticky. His thoughts began to blur. When he could think clearly at all, they drifted to O'Brien, to the hope of the razor blade, and sometimes to Julia. Somewhere she too might be suffering, perhaps even worse than he was. In a rare flicker of clarity, he asked himself, if I could save Julia by doubling my own pain, would I do it? Yes, he answered himself. But it was only an intellectual answer, cold, mechanical. He did not feel it. In this place, no one felt anything, except pain and the knowledge that more pain was coming. Finally, the boots returned. The door opened. O'Brien entered. The shock made Winston forget everything, even the telescreen. "They've got you too," he said aloud without hesitation. But O'Brien only replied softly, almost sadly, "They got me a long time ago." Then he stepped aside. A guard appeared behind him, holding a long black truncheon. O'Brien looked at Winston with quiet certainty. "You know this, Winston. Don't deceive yourself. You did know it. You have always known it." And Winston realized that it was true. He had always known, but there was no time for thought. The truncheon fell on his elbow. The pain was instant and overwhelming. He dropped to his knees, clutching the injured arm. The light exploded into yellow. The guard laughed. Winston writhed on the floor. One thing became clear in that moment. There is nothing worse than physical pain. All ideals, all convictions, all beliefs vanish before it. There are no heroes in the face of pain, only the desperate need for it to stop. That was the final truth. In Orwell's world, pain is the ultimate weapon, not because it kills, but because it remakes. Through pain, the party doesn't just silence dissent, it rewrites identity. It doesn't just destroy love, it replaces it with fear. Even memories become unreliable. Even love becomes hollow. In the end, there is no thought, no resistance, no courage, only obedience, only survival. This passage is not just a depiction of brutality, it is a meditation on the fragile nature of human dignity under power. It shows how, layer by layer, kindness, loyalty, love, and even memory can be peeled away, until the person who remains no longer belongs to themselves. And yet, within that bleakness, Orwell leaves us a subtle message. It begins with silence, but it ends with choice. A man offered bread, and he was destroyed. Another screamed not for justice, but for himself. And a third, Winston, is now standing at the edge, where pain decides who he will become. The lesson is not simply to fear what Orwell described. The lesson is to guard, protect, and defend the things that tyranny attacks first: empathy, truth, memory, and love. Because when those fall, what follows is room 101. And in room 101, no one leaves the same. Lying on the cold floor, Winston did not think of rebellion anymore. He did not think of truth or love or even survival in the way he once had. He clutched his wounded elbow, paralyzed by a pain so absolute that it seemed to dissolve the very edges of his being. The guard's laughter echoed in the background like a hollow bell, but it no longer mattered. Nothing mattered except that the pain might stop. In this moment, Orwell reveals the most intimate betrayal of the self. The betrayal not committed against another person or even against one's ideals, but the betrayal of one's own strength. It is here that the great illusion of heroism fades. The belief that there is always something within us, some final core of courage or conviction that can withstand anything, is gently but thoroughly dismantled. He thought over and over, in the face of pain, there are no heroes. This line, repeated within Winston's mind, is not delivered in bitterness or defeat. It is spoken with a kind of terrible clarity. It's not that courage never existed. It's that courage, as we understand it, belongs to a world where there is still choice, where there is still a self to choose. In The Ministry of Love, Orwell shows us a world where all choices have been engineered out, not by ideological debate or emotional manipulation, but through the simple, inescapable tyranny of physical pain. And in doing so, Orwell does not mock human beings. He does not judge them. Rather, he offers a compassionate mirror. He shows that the systems which cause such collapse are not natural. They are manufactured. They are built not to protect the weak, but to break the strong. They are designed precisely to erase everything that makes us human. For Winston, the path ahead is no longer about resisting the party. It is about surviving the reprogramming of his very soul. The mention of O'Brien's betrayal, "You did know it, you have always known it," serves not only as confirmation of Winston's greatest fear, but as an echo of the broader message Orwell has been crafting throughout the novel. What we suppress in the name of obedience does not vanish. It waits. The party's power lies in convincing its citizens that their darkest suspicions are not only real, but inevitable. It whispers not only "we see everything," but "we have always been right." In such a world, truth becomes not what is observable, but what is allowed. History is a tool, language is a weapon, pain is the final arbiter. Winston's fall is not simply about individual failure. It is about the vulnerability of all human conviction when isolated, unsupported, and slowly dismantled. And this brings us to one of the most haunting reflections of the entire sequence, the death of empathy. Earlier, Winston thought of Julia. He tried to imagine her pain, even to say, "If I could save Julia by doubling my own pain, I would." But he admits to himself that it is not something he feels. It is only something he knows he should feel. Here, Orwell illustrates the deepest wound inflicted by the system, the separation of thought from feeling, of belief from love. The party does not merely want to make people say what it wants. It wants to make them feel what it wants. To erase the natural and implant the artificial. To replace human instinct with mechanical submission. This is why Room 101 exists. Not to extract information, not to punish rebellion, but to transform belief. The skull-faced man understood this before Winston did. That is why he offered up his children. Not because he was evil, but because in that moment, the alternative was worse. The room behind that door didn't hold death. It held the end of the self, and some part of him would rather live in shame than cease to exist at all. This is the power Orwell explores with terrifying precision. That under the right conditions, even love can be turned into a liability. That the deepest truths of our humanity, our instinct to protect, to feel, to care, can be reversed, corrupted, and weaponized. But while Orwell writes this with honesty, he also writes it with purpose. This is not a surrender to despair. It is a warning, a call not to mourn the loss of humanity, but to recognize the systems that make such laws possible. What do we take from this? We learn that truth cannot survive alone. It must be held in community. It must be nourished by empathy, protected by memory, and expressed with courage. We learn that pain is not just a physical sensation, it is a political tool. And when those in power hold the exclusive right to define and distribute it, no moral defense is strong enough on its own. We learn that dignity is fragile, not because people are weak, but because dignity depends on connection. When people are isolated, watched, broken, and made to feel alone, even the strongest hearts begin to bend. And perhaps most urgently, we learn that Room 101 is not only a place in fiction, it is a metaphor for the threshold each of us holds within, the place beyond which our fear eclipses our conscience. The final tragedy of Winston's experience is not that he was tortured. It is that in the moment of pain, he could no longer remember who he was or why he resisted. So we are left, not with a call to arms, but with a call to awareness. We are invited to ask, what systems in our own world reward obedience over truth? What spaces condition us to suppress empathy in the name of efficiency or conformity? Where do we allow fear to dictate silence? And what would our Room 101 contain? In asking these questions, we keep alive the very spirit Orwell feared we might lose. The spirit that whispers even in pain, "This is wrong, and I remember what is right." Let us be the ones who remember. Let us be the ones who speak. Let us be the ones who, even in trembling, extend the bread. Because kindness, though punished, is always the first act of resistance. And just like that, hope crumbles under a single silent blow. What began as a flicker of resistance, hunger, memory, and quiet defiance has now given way to pure survival. In Winston's world, pain isn't just punishment, it's transformation. This chapter reminds us, in a regime that controls not just action, but thought, even the self becomes uncertain. If this struck a chord, let us know in the comments. What would you hold on to if everything else was stripped away? Don't forget to subscribe and join us in the next episode, where Room 101 finally opens.